Welcome back to the Lemon Factor. I'm Chad, and today we're going to install the PRL High Volume downpipe on our 10th generation Honda Accord, the 2019 Honda Accord 2.0 Touring. This is probably the most complicated, most involved modification we've installed to date. And is it difficult? I wouldn't say it's difficult. There's a lot to do, a lot involved in the install. I have broken down this install into 4 different stages so that it doesn't seem so unwieldy. Throughout the video, I will identify the tools needed, where you can buy some of these tools. And finally, I will go through some areas that could pose a problem and what you can do to avoid those problems. So with all that said, the question is installing a high volume downpipe, a freer flowing downpipe, really worth it? And we're gonna find out. So in this video, we'll do the install, and we're gonna then dyno the car on the dyno. We're gonna find out how much horsepower, how much torque we're producing with the new downpipe. And then we're gonna determine, well, you can determine whether or not, for the amount of money it costs to buy the downpipe, for the level of effort to install it, or even money if you're having someone else install it, is the gains worth it? So with that said, if you're looking to find out the easiest way to install a downpipe, regardless of brand, on your 10th generation Honda Accord, then stay tuned. If you haven't done so already, please consider subscribing. Turn on the notifications. Even those of you who have already subscribed, thank you very much. But please turn on the notifications, hit the bell so that you're made aware of future videos, especially as we're installing the downpipe. You're gonna wanna know how much horsepower and torque, how much we gain on the dyno. So make sure that notification is set so you're made aware of when that video is released. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Washer fluid reservoir in the neck. This neck was pushed into that hole, it pops right out. As you can see here, it's clamped on with one of these plastic clips. Take the clip off and tug it out. And then the actual reservoir sat in there. Two 10mm bolts that will disconnect the harness from this air intake tube. And the harness is generally this entire piece right here. The two bolts are, but we have a couple attachments to the harness. We're going to follow that up. So a couple things we want to disconnect here is not specifically to that harness, but to the air intake tube. We're going to disconnect this hose right here, this hose right here. I'm going to come down here and here, let's take a look. There's the turbo wastegate actuator. I'm going to follow that down. Underneath the actuator is there it is, the electrical connection. And we're just going to disconnect that harness right there. Next, you're going to remove two 12mm bolts. I left the socket in here so we can trace it down to the one on the right, which you will need a universal swivel joint for. So let's follow this down. Goes down under here, underneath the wastegate actuator. The other one is on the other side. So right there. Take this bolt out, take this bolt out, and take this bolt out. We should be able to just swivel this out of place, and then we should be able to take the whole thing out. Then went and loosened this so we can move it out of the way. And now we can pull the whole thing out. We have our primary oxygen sensor right here. We're going to follow that over, and right under here is where we're going to disconnect the harness. We're also going to disconnect our secondary O2 sensor. That's connected to the downpipe way down there. But for now, let's just follow the wire up, come in here, and we'll disconnect it here. So we have this one and this one. Then we're going to actually remove the oxygen sensor itself, and you do need a special socket to remove this oxygen sensor. So the secondary is coming up from the downpipe. You want to remove this from the clip because we'll be pulling this out. This you see is disconnected here, but this piece on top slides into here to hold this in place. So it's slid into here. So you're not just disconnecting the harness, you're disconnecting the harness from one another and sliding that out. Let's get that back out. Same thing with up top. You have the same bracket up here. So you're disconnecting the harness from one another, but also from that bracket. I did remove this bolt so that this entire bracket can be pulled out. So now I'm going to break the primary oxygen sensor loose with the socket, and we'll go from there. So we have one here, one right down there, and the fourth one is hidden, but down here, removing this fourth bolt from the heat shield is going to be a little challenging. But as you can see here, you can do it. Just make sure you have a socket wrench that has I wouldn't call this a long one, but it's certainly not a short one. But I think I'm going to remove this plate just to get a little bit more clearance. As you can see, just to get my hand down there, not clearance for to remove the bolt. So to be able to remove this, you're going to first remove your two plastic clips. One from here and the other over here. And then you're going to have two 10mm bolts. And now I have to go fish that out. And one is right under here. and the other is right next to the clip, and then you'll have one more right there. What I had to end up doing was I used the socket, got the socket wrench down there, broke the screw or the bolt loose, and then I had to stick my hand down here, actually more this way, to loosen it the rest of the way. Now that we removed the heat shield, we have access to our two bolts, one opposite side, two nuts, one opposite side. This is probably, knock on wood, somewhere wood, going to be the most difficult part of the install, is getting those off to be able to remove the OEM downpipe. So what I've done already, which you can see from the wet look, is I've sprayed some penetrating fluid. Use whatever penetrating fluid. I used some PB Blaster. I also went under the car and removed the main shield. So it has 4 of these. Just use a flathead screwdriver, 2 of these towards the back or the middle of the car. But we sprayed all of the nuts and bolts where the downpipe connects to the front pipe. I have this piece of cardboard down here for to collect any dripping. We let that sit for several hours. If you enjoy this video, if you find a lot of value in this video, please consider giving the video a thumbs up, give it a like. If you really enjoyed it, I love to read the comments. Leave a comment below. It really inspires me to do more. If you found that this video is really helpful, please consider hitting the super thanks. And you can find that right below the video, right underneath. Between all of that, that really helps in motivating me, and it really helps financially for me to keep going on with the modifications, buying the modifications, comparing the modifications on the dyno time, etc. So any help, any support would be greatly appreciated. We have our secondary oxygen sensor here, and that's connected to the downpipe. There's our oxygen sensor. It is attached with the bracket. We're going to use a 10mm to disconnect this bracket up here. While it's still on the car, we're going to break loose the oxygen sensor. Showing you here the oxygen sensor removal socket and socket wrench. It was easy enough just to remove the secondary oxygen sensor from the downpipe. That way we don't have to worry about it getting caught on anything, doing any damage. There's a bracket on either side. So here's a bracket on this side, and here's the bracket on the other side. So we're gonna disconnect this with two 14mm, and then we'll ultimately disconnect the downpipe from the front pipe. There's 3, 1, 2, and 3, if that comes in focus. Before we start working on these, and again, remember we did put some penetrating fluid on that. We've let that sit for a while. So we came back up and already removed the 2 bolts, one right here, one down here. These are 14mm. I removed the 1 nut down here, and we're in the process of removing this last one, 14mm. You do need a deep socket for this. Loosen these 2 brackets on either side. I was able to pivot them out of the way, and because the OEM front pipe has the flex section, I was able to push this out of the way and snake it quite easily through this opening. Here we have the OEM downpipe / catalytic converter. With the heat shield off, I measured the OEM, and it measures in at slightly over 10 pounds, 10.3 to be exact. Compared that to the new PRL, weighing in at slightly over 13 pounds. So unfortunately, another instance similar to the intercooler where we're adding weight. We're adding a whopping 30% or 3 pounds when compared to the OEM. Again, those are 10 millimeter, putting the heat shield on. Now we are going to cap this O2 sensor hole right here, because we're not going to be using it for the Honda Accord. So we'll attach that right there. We reattached our secondary O2 sensor. Inserted the PRL downpipe from underneath, and I loosely put in the bolts and the nuts. I did apply some anti-seize just so we don't have any problems in the future. We used the supplied gasket in between the downpipe and the front pipe. We attached it with the 3 bolts and washers that were provided. I reattached the bracket. So all of this is attached loosely for now. PRL provides an extension for your secondary oxygen sensor. So it can't reach because it's attached to the downpipe too far down. So this gives you a little bit more of that reach to make it up here. So you simply clip it to the original. I've already reattached it to this bracket. Clip it down here. I did not reinstall the bracket, the OEM bracket that was supporting the oxygen sensor. I put it on this side of this rubber piece to keep it away from the catalytic converter and the heat. I do not have the torque specs. If you know the torque specs, please leave them down in the comments below. I did torque down all 4 to the same torque rating. The last stage we're entering into is putting everything back together again. It is definitely involved. There are definitely points where you can run into trouble and really get set back time-wise. So it's going to be up to you whether or not you think this is worth you doing yourself. If we gain 9, 10 wheel horsepower, okay, fine. You know, I'll take it. I'll be happy with that. If we gain somewhere around 4 or 5 wheel horsepower, man, that was a lot of work. That was a lot of work for not a lot of gain. It does feel more responsive. It does feel like it's spooling up quicker, but you know me, I don't believe in the whole butt dyno, so we're gonna find out for sure once we strap it onto the dyno. I don't notice really a big difference in the exhaust sound. Again, with that said, I hope you liked the video. If you did, please give it a like, and I think that's it for today. Thank you for joining, and until next time.